Oh, hey, deserving listeners. It's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the past 2 weeks. Let's get to it. Love is Blind Season 3, number 1 video that I made. Lita says, the part about polite rejections hit home. I've been avidly online dating for 6 years now. Not once have I had a guy politely tell me that they are not interested in me. They just disappear. Ghosting has become so acceptable. It should not be the norm, people. It's cowardly, hurtful, and just bad manners. I refuse to subscribe to the notion that, well, that's just how online dating culture is. Completely agree, Lita. I love the bit about bad manners. It is bad manners. It is hurtful. It is cowardly. People do it because they're trying to avoid a confrontation and they're kicking the can down the road, right? It's similar to a lot of different things that we do in life, right? Like someone invites you to a party and you're on the fence, but you say yes because maybe you'll go. And then the day of, you just ghost the person because you don't want to get into a confrontation with them. Well, what that does is the person who invited you and you agreed to come and you don't come, it's 10 times more hurtful that you didn't show up, right? So yeah, there's a little bit of hurt when you reach out to the person, text them, call them, whatever, and say, hey, sorry, I can't make it tonight. You could literally just say, I just don't feel like leaving the house. I'm kind of an introvert. I love it when people say stuff like that. I'm not like that. Well, I am kind of, but not really. And when people say that, I'm like, totally get it, you know? Do you. And it kind of gives me an idea of like, oh, so you don't like, lots of crowds. You'd rather just do something small. It kind of cues me into that and I can attend to that, invite them on a one-on-one dinner thing or something. I don't know. But just say that. Now, it's a little bit of hurt. It's a little bit of discomfort, but to just not show, because if you don't show, then people don't want to be with you. Now, with online dating, it can be so anonymous that there isn't any big consequence to doing this sort of thing. But I don't know, how do you sleep at night? PRT Diva says, Colleen might be struggling to make a connection because she's not being her authentic self and people can sense that. Colleen might be struggling to make a connection with other people because she's not being her authentic self and people can sense that. I know because I've struggled with that myself. I noticed that I was having the same issue. It's easy to get dates, but making people stick around was a challenge. It wasn't until a guy told me, I feel like you have a block up. It's hard to get to know you. Then it finally clicked for me. 2 other guys after that said the same thing. At that point, I realized it wasn't them, it was me. I went to therapy, did some soul searching, and learned that I like presenting myself as perfect because of childhood trauma and abandonment. My image is the one thing in my life that I can control. Once I started to let my hair down and stopped obsessing over what people thought of me, I started receiving much better responses. Yeah, I'm really glad for you, PRT, for your awareness and healing around that. Sounds great. And yeah, Colleen could be a candidate for that. It's hard to know. So I've watched ahead, by the way. So I don't want to spoil things, but I've watched beyond what I've posted. I usually record in batches and then Stacy schedules them out. So keep that in mind, actually, because if you comment or if other news comes out, because I've recorded episodes today or yesterday that might air in the next few weeks. So just keep that in mind as you're watching, because I might miss something and have not heard it as of the time of the recording. Anyway, but yeah, Colleen seems like she could be a candidate for that. It's hard to know. And again, I won't go into specifics because of spoilers, because some of you don't watch the show, you just watch my videos, or you haven't seen those episodes yet. But the point is that there are some minor yellow flags that she has trauma that has resulted in her being obsessive and perfectionistic in a self-destructive way. But it's hard to know. Love is Blind Season 3, number 2. ABC says, honestly, I used to be a bit like Colleen back when I was in high school. It is a defense mechanism. I do think she fears fights and confrontations. Yeah, agreed. Well, I'm glad you have awareness on that, ABC, because that means that you can fight against it and also seek healing around it. Love is Blind Season 3, number 3. Sarah, this is the one where Andrew had the fake tears. Sarah says, I'm dying at the wine glass mini rant. Right, so I went on a little mini rant about wine glasses, how I hate them. I worked at a vineyard, and wine glasses are so fragile. They do serve a purpose, but nothing wrong with putting it in any cup you want. Well, that's nice, Sarah, as a person who worked at a vineyard. I find that people who work at vineyards tend to be extremely pragmatic. These are people that work, they're farmers, essentially, right? They're workers. And when it comes to wine, they're not super precious about it. I find that there's a class of people that are just super precious about wine. It's like, yeah, enjoy your wine. It's fine. Says, I have a theory about the eye drops. Well, that's good. It might be that they are doing the sit-down interviews much later, and he is not sad anymore, but he thinks it needs to look like it was shortly after. Yeah, that could be for sure. So at first glance with the Andrew thing, it just looks like he's a total fake person, someone who is trying to put on an act so that everyone will like him, very image conscious. That's the first glance analysis, right? But then you think about it a little more and you're just like, well, he's not a child. He's a grown adult and has watched TV presumably before and understands how things work. So even if he was trying to fake, why did he not fake it in the bathroom behind closed doors, come out with tears streaming down his face or something, or just turn away from the camera or something? He's like on camera. I don't know. You just have to be so ignorant of not only reality TV, but just how the world works, right? Of course they kept that in because it's good TV. Hannah says, I took the eye drops thing as Andrew trying to hide the fact that he's crying for real. Huh. Well, that certainly didn't look that way to me, but your theory is as good as mine. Love is Blind, Season 3, number 4. Ash says, there's no higher speed than the speed of Dr. Kirk's fingers to stop the video when he hears as a woman or as a man, LOL. That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, that's a good observation, Ash. I think that's probably true. And it's funny that that Ash would notice that about me, that I would have patterns of reactivity. But yeah, it does, for all the reasons that I go into. Megan says, I identify very hard with Raven. I have an avoidant attachment style, and it took such a long time to put words to how I felt when someone expresses a romantic interest in me. I would literally want to throw up and start panicking. It comes back to my family not being affectionate. I grew up with a mother with brain damage and a father who passed from alcoholism when I was in high school. Yeah, so just chiming in here, Megan, good self-awareness, and you're saying that you can identify with Raven. It's hard to know what's going on with Raven, but the way it looks could be indicative of avoidant attachment style. And your early childhood experience is a very common breeding ground for avoidant attachment. It's hard to know, but if you have a parent that has cognitive difficulties, brain damage, that could lead to parenting neglect, difficulty along those lines, a father that is drinking often, there is often a distance with alcoholism. And so from 0 to 5, you are left to your own devices too much. And when you're in that situation as a child, you have a lot of different options of coping. It's all kind of an automatic, muddled through response. It's not like 2-year-olds are reading books on how to cope with that. It's just kind of they cobble a defense together over time, and there are common defensive structures that children will develop. One of which is avoidant attachment style, which is like, I'm independent, I don't need others, I don't have feelings, I'm better than other people in some ways. It's narcissistic. It's not always the case, but deep down is this massive desire for attunement and love from other people. And so one of the things that can happen is when people pursue you, you'll notice a feeling of panic and a feeling of like, get away from me. But the way that I see it, it's that the part of you that is desperate for love and attachment is starting to emerge a little bit. So essentially you have two different parts of yourself. You have a part of yourself that really, really wants attachment and is desperate, very similar to preoccupied attachment. It's very needy. And you have another part of you that is stronger, as saying, don't express that, don't even engage that, because you're going to be hurt. Because when you were 2 or 18 months or whatever, you would allow that neediness to come out and it would be rejected and you would be hurt even more. It's one thing to not get your needs met. It's another thing to bid for your needs and to be rejected. It's double bad, right? So you might as well just have single bad, which is, I'm just not going to get my needs met. So there's a very strong part of you, a very strong manager of those needs that's saying, do not express that. There's a lot of danger. There's a lot of fear, a lot of pitfalls, a lot of damage to yourself if you allow yourself to express those needs. Well, when someone's pursuing you, that part of you is, think of it like someone's pursuing you. There's the manager in between, your ego, and then there's your needs. Think of it as your id, I suppose, that is wanting to connect with the other person. It's like, yay, someone wants to connect with me, but there's a manager in between that's just like, no, 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 danger, danger, danger. And so there's this feeling of just, and this panic, right? Now, you also have efforts to actually connect with the person because, either passively, hidden ways, which I won't go into, but so you're describing that throw up feeling, panic feeling, and that's the model of the way that I would describe it. So you say, it is a very, very strange feeling not being able to express love to someone else. I'm lucky that through a lot of therapy and frankly just meeting the right person who took it very slow, we didn't say I love you until 8 months of dating, I was able to overcome it. It's still hard. Sometimes I need space, but I'm glad I found someone that loves. I'm glad I found someone that love works with because I felt broken for a very long time. Yeah, so those are the two keys. One is a lot of therapy to connect with one's vulnerability and to feel safe to be vulnerable. That's the key. It's with avoidant attachment style as opposed to preoccupied attachment style. There's a very clean, simple path. It's almost always the case of actually connecting with your vulnerability, expressing it, and having someone not reject us, or at the very least be neutral about it. But at best, they actually tend to us, and it's a good experience. It's very, very difficult. It is nearly impossible. When I'm working with a legit avoidant attached individual in therapy, for the first few years, we're still working up to that vulnerability. It can take a long time. We can talk about it intellectually. They can sort of tend to themselves internally, but it's not uncommon for a client to just start crying in therapy, right? Of course, right? Cry in therapy, it's normal. For an avoidant person to cry in therapy, oh boy. I mean, literally, it could take 10 years of hard, intense, weekly work for that client to eventually cry. And even then, it's like not fully spontaneous crying. It's just like a little bit of crying. Having said that, I have worked with avoidant people, and within the first 15 minutes, they burst out into tears. So I'm not saying it's universal, but yeah, so you're saying it's hard. Sometimes you need space. So not only did you have a lot of therapy, but you also found someone that can work with you on that doesn't get triggered by your efforts to distance. And, it's all about how you ask for distance, right? It's just be like, because a typical reaction without awareness would be just be like, you're crowding my space, get away from me, and when you're supposed to be building a romantic companionship, that's not a great message. It's hurtful. Instead, you just be like, I'm having an avoidant moment. I need my space. I'm getting claustrophobic. I love you. I'm sorry. This is my issue. But if you keep doing this, it's going to freak me out. And that's where I'm at. The best case scenario, you're like, honey, when you express your desire to be with me emotionally, there's a part of me that wants to invite you in and is desperate for that. But there's another part of me that's very scared of that. And one or both of those sides of me might emerge. And so just know that, like, I'm really, it's a me issue, but I'm really busted up about people wanting to be close to me because of my past. And so I apologize in advance for coming across as standoffish. It's not you. It's not even really me. It's this defense mechanism that's ego dystonic. Anyway, my grinning cat says, still hypothesizing that what connected them are churchy vibes. Oh, so I think we're talking about Colleen and Cole. I'm still hypothesizing that what connected them are the churchy vibes, but these conversations are not shown by Netflix. So we all just get to be confused about their connection. Yeah. Abby says, I wonder if Cole wanted to talk about it later because he was proposing talking about it when the cameras were not there. Right. So this is the episode where Cole and Zay had that fight in the morning, that first morning together. And he's like, well, we'll talk about it later. And Abby's suggesting, which I thought too, I don't know if I said it, that Cole might be like, well, the cameras are here, so we'll just talk about it later, which would be a really nice thing to do for him, to do for her, because it's like, well, let's not air our dirty laundry out, let's try to work it out when the cameras aren't here, so we're both not performing, or you don't say anything that's humiliating to you, and I don't either. Smelly says, I'm a morning person, and I cannot lay in bed and cuddle much. Once I'm awake, I'm up and moving. I get up, so this is in reference to Cole getting up and how Zay was upset about that. I get up, do some chores, make some coffee, feed the dogs, and let them out, etc. My partner loves to stay in bed and cuddle all morning. At first, it made him worried that I didn't stay and cuddle, but now we've got a system where I'll get up, do most of the stuff, and then bring him coffee and spend coffee time together in bed. I'll also stop in and give him hugs between chores. Well, Smelly, that is very nice of you, for the two of you, that you've worked that out, right? Instead of getting in fights about it and assuming the other person is a jerk face, the two of you are just like, well, we have this different thing. Let's see if there's another way. So you get up, you do your thing, and then you come back and you cuddle. It's great. Love is Blind, Season 3, Number 5. April says, am I crazy? I feel like Raven and SK were sensible for taking things slow and not talking about how much they love each other every minute. Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. Is it totally understandable for some of these couples, upon meeting each other in person for the first time, to take it slow? Absolutely. Is it a sign that things aren't really quite right and they're not really quite compatible and they don't have a lot of chemistry? It seems like it's more the latter. Certainly could be the former, absolutely. Kelly says, I relate to Zeneb so much. I used to have that fear and anxiety in every relationship. I think preoccupied attachment. Ironically, I ended up with someone goofy like Cole, and it actually helped me a lot. His humor helped diffuse a lot of tense situations. Yeah, Kelly, I might have talked about this, or I will eventually, that I don't know if Zeneb has preoccupied attachment. It looks like that on the TV show, but it's heavily edited. They could be performing, who knows. But for people with preoccupied attachment, they often will fit well with someone that is more securely attached and has a way of diffusing the situation, whether it's that they're just a really good listener or they make jokes. They're just sort of goofy. They just sort of give off this vibe of just like, well, the kind of the way Cole is, right? The sort of jokiness about it. Because when Cole tries to communicate to Zay his complaints, he is usually kind of joking. I don't know if that's the best thing to do, but you're saying, Kelly, that does work for you, which is good. Love is Blind, Season 3, Number 6. Anne says, Matt is anti-toxic masculinity. So I was saying in that episode, I was like, oh, it's great. I can't remember what Matt was saying, but he was saying it was okay to cry or something like that. And Anne's like, when Kirk says Matt is anti-toxic masculinity, Dr. Kirk, you are in for a rude awakening. Yeah, so I've watched ahead and agreed. But we'll get there eventually. Silver says, Cole is a little insensitive. And by the way, it's always this fear of mine that I will make a call or point something out in the beginning, and then that individual, like Matt, for example, who looked fairly healthy in the beginning, and then I say something and y'all have watched ahead and know that that statement or that assessment is not only wrong, but like direct opposite or the wrong interpretation with more data. So I just hope y'all take that into consideration, that I haven't seen the rest of it yet. And so I'm just going off of what I see. Plus, you can have someone who is toxic masculine, who is abusive, angry, intimidating, and also they have behavior that one would call anti-toxic masculinity. So Silver says, Cole is a little insensitive, but not malicious at all. Cole is a little insensitive, but not malicious at all. Zay's insecurities have her reading much more into his comments and paints him as a really hurtful person. Yeah, I think that becomes more apparent throughout the season. Love is Blind, Season 3, number 7. Invisible says, Bartice in the pods was saying, when I'm 85, this body won't be here anymore. I want someone to love me for who I am on the inside. Bartice in real life to his fiance when he meets Nancy, looks effing matter. Yeah, I didn't react too much to that because it was so obvious. And, maybe Bartice has a wish for something that is hard for him to realize in his heart. There's nothing wrong with having that wish, and then when you actually enact it, it's like, oh, this isn't really, I thought I'd be able to handle this, but it's actually not really what I'm looking for. It's hard to know what's going on with Bartice. He's shown some strength, and he's shown some issues. Teensy says, Bartice and Cole have no filter. Not every single thought needs to be said to your partner. No need to lie, but no one needs or wants details about how amazingly hot you find someone who's not your partner. Save yourself the headache, LOL. Yeah, I've been over that. There's nothing wrong with being honest. There's also nothing wrong with just holding that stuff in. Depends on the style of relationship you want to be in. But at the very least, if you're going to be honest about that sort of thing, like Cole and like Bartise were, you should be considerate of your partner's feelings and exhibit that care, right? Like if Bartise said something like, "Oh, when I saw Raven, wow, what do you say, a smoke show? What a smoke show." And I didn't know what anyone looked like, and so it's just really shocking to me or something. But I really connected with you, Nancy, and you're very attractive too. That's the whole other thing about this show. It's like they make out Zay and Nancy to be, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, and it's like I don't really see that much of a difference personally, but in the eye of the beholder. But the way they talk about it, it's just sort of like, especially Bartise, he's like, well, Raven, when she walks into a room, everyone looks, and heavily implying that when Nancy walks into a room, no one looks, no one thinks she's attractive. It's like, so anyway, there's a way to communicate honestly while considering someone's feelings. At the very least, just saying you're sorry. It's like, I'm so sorry that I have these feelings. I'm so sorry I'm honest. I'm so sorry that, does that hurt your feelings? I don't mean that. There's ways to communicate, but the way that, especially Bartise, the way he was just talking, he's just like reporting to his mom. Like he came home from school and he's just like, there's a cute girl to school. And then he's just yammering about it. And then he turns to Nancy, and Nancy has that face and he's like, oh, well, never mind. Anyway, it's like, it didn't even compute to him that it would hurt her feelings. I don't know. Good old Abandonable Snowman says, if you want to be in a radically honest type of relationship, that's something you have to discuss beforehand. Agreed. You can't just shove that on someone in the moment without any consideration for their feelings. Agreed. Georgina says, I had a boyfriend that was like Bartise. Thank you for this video, Dr. Honda. I was made to be crazy for not liking how he chose to express himself. Hearing your response is honestly so comforting. Yeah, there's a semi-gaslighting aspect to presentation like Bartise, because he can come across like, well, because it's really weird when you're interacting with someone and they're hurting your feelings and they don't exhibit any awareness of it. You start to question, it's one thing if Bartise was like, so Nancy, Raven is super hot. It's like an indication that Bartise has some awareness that it's going to hurt her feelings. The way he was talking, it was like completely not on his radar at all, not even a possibility. And when you're just two people and you have one person that seems very sure of their paradigm or something, especially if they were to come at you and be like, why are you upset? I'm just telling you, like, I'm supposed to lie to you, those kinds of simplistic, reductionistic ways of looking at it. And so it can feel like, wait, am I the weird one here? I mean, they are being honest. I think that possibly was what Nancy was going through. I'm not sure. All right, 90 Day Fiancé, Big Ed, number 50. Little says, thank you so much for this episode and for pointing out the tactics of abusive people. I have a defectiveness schema and I have been told so many times that I am naive. I am so grateful to you, Dr. Honda, for this. It's a real eye-opener for me. Yeah, so you mentioned defectiveness schema, which is a schema, a belief about the self, a belief about the world, developed early in life because it was at least modeled to you that it was true, but not true, that there's something deeply wrong with you, perhaps being naive and dumb, if you will. And then when abusive people come along, they might tap into that and call you naive, that sort of thing, like the way Ed does. And if you don't have a defense against that and you actually believe that about yourself anyway, which might be kind of the reason why you even involved yourself with someone like that, because some of our coping mechanisms to defectiveness schema is to find people who actually will make us feel defective because it fits in with how we see the world. We're surrendering to the idea that we are defective. And to hear, others, me included, talk about how that's not okay, I hope that you, Little, can feel like that's not okay to be treated that way. It's what, for Ed to say something like, you hurt my feelings, or I'm having a trigger right now, I'm having a reaction, Okay, but to blame and name call and say you're stupid, you're naive, there's something wrong with you is not okay and abusive. Prussia says, actually, what Liz was saying is that she's the one teaching Ed how to kiss. Oh, right, because I was like, is he saying da-da-da? So what Prussia is saying, actually, what Liz was saying is that she's the one teaching Ed how to kiss because he's been single for 29 years. Her point is that even though he claims to have so much experience managing people, she has more experience when it comes to relationships and intimacy. Ah, that makes sense. Farah says, the thing with Rose was that she had a loving father and a family support system. She may not have monetary wealth, but she had a lot of self-esteem and self-love. Ed tried to break her, but he could not. Liz has had a very rocky and unstable childhood and wasn't even raised by her mom, let alone her dad. Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about that angle, that Rose would have self-esteem and a good family support system that would help her to see through the situation, and Liz might not. Nikita says, I'm really glad you mentioned that style of abuse that Ed exhibits. I've been on that treadmill before. It feels really crappy because people on the outside don't really take it seriously because it's not physical. Yeah, agreed. By the way, we have new merch. This will come in t-shirt form and mug form and other forms, poster form. And if you see it, it's my 11 components to effective apologies. Stacy designed this. And I kind of consider it to be like a publication, like I'm publishing, because, I like publishing. I've written a book and other articles and stuff. And since doing the podcast, I haven't had any written publications in some years. And I miss it to some extent. And to have, I'm still publishing, right, on YouTube and podcasts. I do consider that to be academic publishing of a sorts. It depends on the sort of episode. But anyway, this is a written form. Now, there's a lot of elaboration. But the thing I was thinking was that if you had this with, so there's a number of different uses for this. One is that if you have a partner that doesn't watch the YouTube channel, you could wear this as you're engaging in a situation where your partner has transgressed upon you, and this could be a passive-aggressive attack on your partner. Be like, by the way, apology, want to follow these? Or if you do watch together, you could each get a shirt, or at the very least just print it out and hold it. But, if you have a shirt, you could follow along, each of you, and actually apologize to each other as you wear the shirt. It's just right there. So, I don't know. I really like this merch. I think it's a new style for me where I'm actually publishing the ideas that I talk about. And yeah, so if you want this shirt, you can get it. Also mug, poster, blah, blah, blah. 90 Day Fiance, by clicking the link below, by the way. 90 Day Fiance, Big Ed 51. Lillian says, did everyone forget that Ed, over the phone, yelled at Liz to throw the ring away? Then he calls her dumb for doing it. Interesting. I had forgotten about that, but a good point. 90 Day Fiance, Big Ed 52. Ms. Violet says, does Liz exhibit codependency or dependency? I always get those confused. Well, listen to my deep dives on codependency and dependency, but in a nutshell, the internet and society has these things confused with each other. So good old Ms. Violet, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you have, because if you just look online, a lot of people will confuse codependency with dependency, which is bothersome to me, particularly with my clinicians. I will be teaching students and they will be using codependent in this wrong way. These are well-defined topics, particularly dependent personality disorder. But in a nutshell, codependency, and let me go to my notes here, my definition, this is my developed definition upon really thinking about it and looking at all the literature. And there are different shades of this depending on which author you're referring to. But generally speaking, codependent personality, and I do consider it to be a personality trait or disorder or something, spectrum, is characterized by the need to manage someone else who has an ongoing self-destructive behavior or problem. So a real common codependent individual is they will match up with someone who suffers from addiction, that kind of thing, or a personality disorder, or something along those lines. Someone who's very underfunctioning. So think codependent person is an overfunctioner. There are various different types of this, which I'll go into in my deep dive. Dependency is the way it sounds. You are dependent. You're overly dependent, which is, in my book, defined by two different main characteristics. One is you have an incompetent schema. You believe deep down that you are inherently incompetent. And two, you, as a solution, will depend on other people. So you have an overdependence on others because you believe you're inherently incompetent. You're always going to screw things up. To some extent, codependency and dependency are opposites, because a codependent person will actually fit well with a dependent person. But when we're referring to codependency, what we're referring to is this old notion, and I wish we had a different word for it. Overfunctioner is a better word for it, but codependency, the word dependency comes from chemical dependency, because you have someone who's dependent on substances. So you have dependent on a person, right? Overly dependent on a human being. And then you can be dependent on a substance, right? And these are very different things. You could say they're related, of course, but they're very different things. And so the person dependent on a substance, that's kind of an old term to some extent that we used in the past. And then you have this co-pilot that is going along with the dependency on the substance. So the codependent is a co-pilot in the chemical dependency in the addiction. So think of like co-addict is a better term, or more intuitive term than codependent. Dependent is the way it sounds, overly dependent. And the schema developed that drives codependency is in early childhood, when someone is made to feel like their only worth or their only way of finding attunement or attention or love is through taking care of someone else. So think of a parentified child, that kind of thing. Heather says, your insight is always mind-blowing and has helped me to be noticeably more empathetic towards others. Your words in particular, in this particular episode about dependent personalities, really hit deep and answered questions I've had for myself for a long time. Thank you 10,000% as always. Well, you're welcome, Heather. I hope you get the healing and self-awareness that you deserve, because dependency is something that people will inherently believe about themselves. They will think, well, yeah, I mean, I'm incompetent. Look at all, the issue is that if you're made to feel incompetent when you're very young, you're basically born into a situation, or you emerge as a young child and into adulthood with this being treated that way, that you're incompetent. Plus, when you believe you're incompetent, there will be two things that will happen. One is that you will avoid exhibiting your incompetence. So you will avoid things that test your competence, which means you don't learn from anything. So you might avoid taking tests or taking a risk or getting a job or starting to challenge yourself or something like that. So by the time you're 35 years old, you are incompetent at a lot of things, not because you're inherently incompetent, but because you've avoided anything to test your competence. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The other thing is that when you feel incompetent, you will have a lot of anxiety as you head into a test of your competence, right? And so you will, because of that anxiety, have screw-ups, if you will. This is an underestimated thing. We all do this. When I'm intimidated, I will make a lot more mistakes, some very silly mistakes that I would never make normally. And so that's something else to think about. Also, when you are dependent, you become dependent on another person, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a spouse or sometimes even your own child. And when you do that, you will sometimes match up with a codependent person, for example, and they will save you. They will step in. So even if you're 35 years old and you're trying to branch out with your independence and your competence, but because you have anxiety about it, the codependent person will pick up on that, and the codependent person believes their only worth is to take care of someone with a problem. So the codependent person doesn't want you to be competent subconsciously. Consciously, they want you to. That's what they're always yelling at you about, potentially, depending on the type of codependency. So it becomes a dynamic that will perpetuate this schema of incompetence and literal incompetence. Dependent people tend to be incompetent, not because they're inherently incompetent, but because they haven't tried, they haven't taken risks, people haven't let them. When they do venture, imagine you're 35 and you take on a task that 13-year-olds usually take on, and you screw it up. Well, when a 13-year-old screws it up, you're just like, well, you're 13. But when you're 35, you feel abnormal and you feel like there's something deeply wrong with me. So clearly I'm incompetent. I need to depend on the other person. And the dependent person will say, look at you, you made that mistake. And the codependent person is doing it out of anxiety and out of a need to fulfill their desire to be worth something. They believe their only worth is to take care of someone else. Both people don't believe they have inherent worth. Dependent people, codependent people, they don't believe they have any worth. Their only worth, the codependent person's only worth is to take care, and the dependent person, to some extent, their only worth is when they're being taken care of, right? If they're left on their own, then they will make mistakes and they will be criticized and rejected and they will have no worth. So they can eke out a little bit of worth if they can just allow someone to take care of them, or get someone to praise them or to validate them frequently. Anyway, Golden Oreo, which I like that name, Golden Oreo. I don't want to come off as cold to these people, Ed and Liz, but I'm so exhausted by them. The constant abuse and breakups are a lot to watch. What is good about this is that I'm learning that if someone is in a situation like Liz, to just be there for the person and not try to sway them, right? So what Golden Oreo is saying, what I'm learning from my process of watching Ed and Liz is that if I have a friend like this, a family member, there's not a lot you can do. And so one of the best things you can do is just be there for them. Because if you get wrapped up in it, one, you can end up criticizing the Liz's of the world or the Eds. But also you get wrapped up in it, you get real upset, you get triangulated, you get pulled in, you get, fused with the situation, and then you end up taking on the issue, destroying yourself to some extent, and maybe even ruining the relationship that you have with Liz or Ed or whatever. And that's not helpful. And this is something that all therapists need to learn as well. We all need to learn to become more differentiated. It's a big part of the world of marriage and family therapy is differentiation. And it's just that. It's knowing to be in contact, but also to not get fused with the situation such that you lose objectivity, whatever objectivity is, but it's debate. Anyway, Golden Oreo says, Ed is abusive, and I want Liz to find someone who will not break up with her all the time and abuse her. I can acknowledge, though, that for either of them to break the cycle, though it would take many years of therapy. Yeah, agreed. Big Ed 53, Bella says, Ed perfectly knows Liz is not into women. He just wants to isolate her. Yeah, it's possible, but I think it's also possible that he, given his triggers and his trauma, he will believe things that don't make any sense. And then he operates from that place. But it's also possible that he, quote unquote, wants to isolate her. It's hard to know. It really just depends on what's going on for him and what his personality is. Most abusive people, in my experience, are reacting out of good faith. Because they interpret things very wrongly, very distortedly, and have thus very distorted emotions, they react from those distorted perceptions and distorted emotions, and it feels right to them. Like there's possible that when you go to Ed in that situation, be like, okay, lie detector test, we don't have that, but if we had that ability, and we say, do you really believe that she's into women? Do you think that that's possible? That he would say, well, yeah, I mean, look what happened. I mean, da-da-da. And then she said that one thing. Yeah, of course. But us from the outside would be like, huh? And of course, Liz would be like, huh? But we become distorted. All of us do. The bigger the traumas, the less the self-awareness, the less the healing, the more distortion, the more sure you are of yourself. Bumper Chars says, when I was first starting watching your videos, I got the urge to pursue therapy in college and take relevant classes since I had some extra time. The more I watched, though, the more I realized the dedication required would be astronomical, not only for school, but for every single session of every single client. Hats off to all therapists that take years of education, apprenticeship, and practice to make couples like Ed and Liz work out. Not for me, unfortunately. Yeah, it's interesting. People will email in or comment that say that my videos helped to push them. They already had a calling in psychology and helping others, but my content over the past 14 years helped to motivate them or, shepherded them along, or was one of the factors or something. But I don't get comments like this very often, but I like it. That for you, Bumper Chars, you're just like, at first I was like, oh, that maybe I should go into psychology. But the more I watch your videos and realize, wait, so you have to treat the Eds and the Liz's of the world as couples, and maybe Eds as individual therapy, you have to stick with that. You have to have compassion for them. You have to build a strong relationship with them. You have to endure years of watching, because, people like this, they don't change overnight. I wouldn't. So if I was treating this couple, I wouldn't be surprised if you wouldn't see any noticeable change for the first. I mean, you'd see usually there's an immediate reduction in the big incidents, the highly destructive, abusive incidents, but the ongoing snipes that Ed would probably do and all the various things would probably continue for years. And as a therapist, it's not great to see, but you have to accept that. Otherwise, you will burn out. You will attack the client. You will move them too fast. You will judge them. Their feelings will be hurt. It takes a long time. And so you have to be able to endure that. You have to be able to handle that and tolerate it and see the bigger picture. And that's a big part of the growth of a therapist. It takes years and years and years to become what I would say confident in your competence, particularly as a couple therapist. Being a couple therapist, I find to be perhaps the hardest mode of therapy. It has the most countertransference for various different reasons. But in order to really step into the wisdom of being a therapist for couples particularly, and to some extent individuals, and families, but anyway, mainly couples, you have to have a long number of years where you watch couples slowly get better over time. Because for some couples, 5 years will go by, weekly therapy, no change, no noticeable positive change. And if you don't have that experience, because someone can tell you, just give it some time, it takes time, but you have to experience it yourself. If you don't have that experience, you could be like, I'm failing, this client isn't working, I'm not doing the right kind of therapy, what's wrong with them, what's wrong with me, maybe therapy is a big sham. And now I'm not saying that's always the case, but anyway, so for you, Bumper, you're just like, I don't know if I want that. And I'm glad that you found your answer to that, because it's for some people, they do enter the field without really understanding what they're getting into. And I could see watching my channel to be one source of information along those lines. People have an idea in their mind about, like, for example, I saw someone posting on Reddit, they were like, I want to be a forensic psychologist, like on TV shows where they show up at the crime scene and they try to profile the killer, that kind of thing. And I'm like, and someone soon, very quickly commented, it's like, that's not a forensic psychologist. Let me describe to you what potentially, very rarely a forensic psychologist will do this, but there's a lot of pseudoscience to that. There's not a lot of funding for it. It's not very useful often. Anyway, point is that forensic psychology, it's a lot of mundane test administration, report writing, that kind of thing. It can be interesting, but I wasn't very interested in it. It's very limited. The kinds of things you would think a forensic psychologist would do, it just sounds so fascinating. But it ends up it wouldn't be uncommon for a forensic psychologist to spend their entire year, maybe like 70% of their work is just doing the same tests over, like if they focus on kids and they assess for ADHD or something, and it's just the same test to the kids and the same test to the parents and the same test to the teacher and the same report writing and the same administration of the report. And it can be helpful, it can be interesting, you can earn a lot of money, but for me, I just thought like, this is not for me. I want to do clinical work. Ivanka says, you inspired me to pursue a career in therapy. I just graduated with an undergrad in psychology, and I am looking into routes to become a therapist. All thanks to your YouTube channel and admiring your work throughout the past 3 years. Thank you for everything you do. Well, Ivanka, yeah, so I was referring to comments that I get like that, and I'm glad, because there needs to be more of us in the world, and there's a shortage of us. So good for you. And I consider it, not to be, pumping myself up, but I do consider it to be a noble calling. When I meet students who just enter the program, I will sometimes even say that. I'll just be like, I just want to commend you you could have done a lot of things. You obviously have some amount of privilege to be able to afford to go to graduate school, to have the time or something. You could have done a lot of things with that privilege. You could have become a banker, with no offense against bankers, but whatever. You could have become more materialistic, or you could have decided to, whatever. But you decided that you wanted to help people, and you knew that you weren't going to be rolling in money. You know what I mean? So, and you knew it was going to be stressful, and you knew it was going to be hard. You knew that graduate school would be hard. You knew that being a novice therapist would be hard, but you wanted to do that. You wanted to sacrifice part of your privilege, part of your life, dedicating part of your life to actually helping human beings, face to face, right? There's lots of different ways to help people. Helping face to face is really quite a powerful experience and difficult. And so I will commend people for that. It sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but mainly in my head and my heart, I'm really just focusing on others. I would say the same thing if I wasn't a therapist. It's similar to people who work for Doctors Without Borders or something. It's a similar kind of commending process. I will similarly commend those individuals for sure. Anyway, Cash says, I sold shoes for a while. So I talked about being a shoe salesman. Cash says, I sold shoes for a while. I was eventually fired in the most amicable way because I was such a terrible salesperson. Yeah. Amicable. Well, I was not treated in an amicable way, and I quit in a quiet way, but not a nice way. But I felt like my manager was, I wish I remembered what he was yelling at me about frequently. But the fact that he yelled at me and I had only worked there for 4 weeks or something like that is like telling, right? Angela and Michael, 41. Tracy says, I thought the same exact thing. They take someone off the show. So I was talking about, why is Angela still on the show, but Alina and others have been removed? Tracy says, I thought the same exact thing. They take someone off the show for a racist comment they made years ago, rightfully so, but leave an active, abusive woman on the show. She's physically, mentally, and financially abusive. I keep waiting to see the producers of the show exercise some morals. Yeah, so it's hard to know what the moral thing to do if you were a producer of a show like this, because you could argue that it's helpful to Michael to have this recorded and because presumably it would be happening anyway, right? We don't know, but it's possible. And for it to be filmed and aired and for people to stand up for Michael, because that seems to be the predominant response, is perhaps helpful to him and possibly to her. Hard to know, though. Now, you could argue they're exploiting it for sure. I don't know. Maybe they're even drumming it up a little bit, encouraging the abuse because it's good television. If they were doing that, obviously that would be immoral. It's possible that having the cameras there makes the abuse lesser than it would normally, because that would stand to reason, right? So I don't know what the morality is. I hear people accusing TLC of being immoral or wrong in this way, and I don't know. It's because another benefit to society to have these examples is to show the world what abusive behavior can look like. I don't know anyone who would watch this show, I hope not anyway, and go like, yeah, that's good behavior. Angela's letting him have it. That makes sense to me. So, or at least a good portion of the viewership would see it for what it is, or sort of like, ooh, actually, I know, I've been through something like that, or I kind of do stuff like that. Is that what I look like? Yeah. It provides an example that we can actually look at, with all the thing. I watch a lot of sports, a lot of football, and what's really the value of that, really, when we come down to it? So there's some, but it's possible that the show is helpful. I don't know. It's hard to gauge that. Linda says, is anyone else sick of Angela? I really, really like Kirk's reaction videos, but I am just so tired of watching this abusive woman. Yeah, it's hard for me too. Noel says, Dr. Honda, you should definitely prioritize your well-being and stop watching this if it is harmful to you. Just chiming in here. Yeah, it's certainly rough in the moment, but I don't know if it really sticks with me. At least I don't think it does. You go on. However, I can't tell you how valuable this content is. Aside from validating men in general that have been victims of abuse, I am so hopeful that Michael in particular might get wind of this channel and get the strength and validation he needs to leave. My heart breaks for him. Thank you for not dancing around the topic or mincing words. Michael is being abused. Shame on TLC for facilitating both his abuse and his abuser. Yeah, well, right. So that would be a benefit to not only me commenting on it, but also maybe even the show existing. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. When I'm watching, that's not usually what I'm thinking. I'm not usually thinking, how dare they have this couple on here? Even if Alina were on the show and she were confronted about being racist online, I think that would be helpful. To just ignore it completely, I don't know. There's pros and cons. Angela, now, if they, quote unquote, you could argue that Angela is being rewarded because she is given fame and money and a platform. So You can make that argument. I don't know the answer, though. Angela and Michael 42. Noxie says, I feel traumatized just listening to Angela's tone. She scares me on screen. Lindsay says, a lot of people suspect that Angela is on pills or drinking. I missed the last few weeks and assumed it was just her teeth making her slur. But now that I've caught up, it's much more than slurring. Yeah, I noticed that as well, that Angela seems to be slurring to some extent more recently. And I don't usually like to comment on this because I feel like there's a lot of people that assume that drugs are involved. There's just this blanket where it's like, oh, it's just, and you're not doing that, Lindsay, but there's a lot of just assumptions. And I think in your longer comment, you were wondering about painkillers, which can cause slurring, of course. But I don't know. It's hard to say. There's a lot of reasons why someone would slur. People, when they get older, sometimes there'll be cognitive decline, which can result in some slurring. Who knows? She's often drinking. When she's in Nigeria, I don't know, but my impression is she's drinking a lot when she's there. And I think she drinks to try to cope, and I think it gets ahead of her sometimes. I think she drinks too much, like when she went to the house and was attacking the car. She seemed quite intoxicated on the road on the way over there. But yeah, could she be affected by medications? Yeah, but it doesn't make people act like that. I just want to point that out. You're not saying this, Lindsay, but I find some people will be like with Charlie, for example, when he was flying off the handle, people will be like, oh, well, he's obviously on coke. And I'm like, well, cocaine doesn't cause that behavior. It could influence it, maybe, but it doesn't cause people to just fly off the handle with anger, Anyway, Angela and Michael 43, the Virology channel says, as a former reality TV producer, TLC and its producers are in it for the views and the advertisers. Right, so I was like, why are they? And this person is saying that I'm a former reality TV producers, and TLC and its producers are absolutely in it for the views and the advertisers. They know what they're doing. They haven't spoken to Michael, because I was like, why haven't they interviewed Michael? They haven't, or they don't do it very much. They haven't spoken to Michael because it's more powerful to direct your ire towards Angela's behavior. Her heinous opinions and double standards make viewers tune in. It's like watching a car crash. In fact, there is a petition to get her banned from the show, which the producers must be aware of, and that will just make them double down. It tunes in to all the veiled racist tropes that appeal to people. End of comment. Yeah, that's interesting. So, one, it's good to get some perspective there, because it seems like that would be likely, right? But to know that they would double down, because I was also wondering about that. I think I might have speculated that directly, either in that video or later. But yeah, it makes me, because I heard about this petition to get rid of Angela, and I was like, I wonder if the producers are like, wow, we must be onto something, more Angela, right? Because the one killer, the one death knell of a reality TV show is that it's not interesting, it's not compelling, it doesn't cause an emotional reaction. Angela definitely causes an emotional reaction, right? Not only do you have ire for her, but potentially even for the producers, all the while more viewership, right? Now, might that result in some people turning away? Because I think I've seen this happen a few times, not only with TV shows, but also with radio hosts. I saw this, I think, with Dr. Laura Schlesinger, if you can remember her, and also with Tom Likas, and also with the Jerry Springer show. All three of those content providers in the beginning were much more calm and much more relatable to me anyway. I would listen to talk radio and Dr. Laura Schlesinger, Tom Likas in the beginning. I don't think I watched Jerry Springer in the beginning, but from what I understand, it was much more mainstream, if you will, and less dramatic. But over time, they learn, these producers, that if they have controversy and yell at people and buy in, for Tom Likas, he bought into massive amounts of misogyny. Dr. Laura Schlesinger bought into, I think, just general bigotry, if I remember right. And then with Jerry Springer, of course, he bought into people fighting, and everyone knew it was fake. There was these exposés that came out that people were being paid to act like they were in a relationship with each other or something, and it looked fake, and people knew it. And I remember when those came out, because I hated the Jerry Springer show when it was becoming popular. It just wasn't for me. And then when the expose came out, I'm like, well, surely no one will watch this now. But the viewership continued to grow. So anyway, point is that I think, yes, it can increase viewership and thus more money for everyone. But I think it turns off a segment of the viewership, right? Like with Tom Likas and Dr. Laura Schlesinger, they, I think, became more popular, but I and a lot of other people, I think, like me, just stopped watching, stopped listening, stopped paying attention. And relevant to this, myself, I am a content producer and provider, and there have been times when it's been suggested to me, or there's been like a brainstorm floated of going down a road that wouldn't be purposefully trying to be dramatic and controversial on the internet, but might result in that. And thus I will think, well, that probably, like, for example, after the trial, the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp trial, the new topic online was the Marilyn Manson, Rachel Wood controversy. That was the next thing that everyone was talking about. And I got a lot of emails and a lot of requests to talk about it. And I did briefly, but I had that why in the road where I was like, well, if I go down that road, I will probably get more viewership, potentially more money, more notoriety, more fame. But I looked into it a little bit and I was like, there's not a lot of information. It's just a lot of hearsay at this point. I was getting a lot of requests for that, perhaps more than any other thing I've been requested since the trial. And I said, yeah, just maybe when there's more developments that come out, I'll do an episode. Maybe even if there's a trial, which there may or may not be in the near, a couple of years, I might do reaction videos to that. But at this point anyway, it doesn't appeal to me for those reasons. But at this point, I think the only reason why I would do that is if I was trying to get more money, but I would also, I think, be handing myself over to what I think Jerry Springer and the others handed themselves over to. They gave up their integrity. They gave up their mission, the purpose of why. I'm guessing Jerry Springer got into this originally because he wanted to, help the world. He wanted to tackle interesting topics. And then the show just became this fake, almost like wrestling show, if you will. Now, I don't know what was going on in their minds, but Amber says, on the lighter side of things, I watch your videos on our TV while cleaning, and my 10-month-old son started waving at you when I turn on your videos now. That's hilarious. Your 10-month-old son's like, hey, Dr. Hannah. That's great. I love seeing, if you ever want to take a picture of that and post it on Instagram or DM me on Instagram or email me, I don't know, I delight in seeing where y'all are watching this stuff. Angela Michael 44. Daria says, Kirk, you'll have to make a shirt that says, we'll use this as a learning tool in honor of Angela and Michael episodes. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to hear y'all point out different things for shirts or things that I'll say, because I'm always like, yeah, I probably do say that a lot. I think the specific phrase that I use a lot is, we use this as a jumping off point, right? What a weird shirt that would be. Lily says, Dr. Kirkanda must be a person that has to see things through till the end. He earnestly continues to cover this couple. Take care of yourself, Dr. Honda. Yeah, I am one of those people, and I've talked about that before, that I'm a completist and I need to see things through to the end. Even if it's not necessarily what's best for everyone. I mean, there's a line, of course, but anyway. Sherry says, I think this is so valuable. You, as a professional, show exactly how this behavior is abusive and that it is a pattern followed by other abusers. Maybe some victims will see that what's happening in their own relationship is actually abuse and that they don't have to live with it. Yeah, that's my hope, Sherry, and I think that's happened at least a few times. Angela and Michael 45, Kristen says, I'm not saying Angela is borderline or histrionic, but my mom is both, and she behaves exactly this way. Now my mom is really sick and has little cognitive function, so I have to take care of her, and it's just hard. Yeah, Kirsten, I'm really sorry you went through that. There's so many horrible things I imagine that you went through. And I've heard this, I've worked with a lot of clients like this, where they were abused by a parent with a personality disorder, perhaps, and the adult child knows it, and says like, yes, I was abused by that parent. And yet, when they continue to tell their story, they will tell me that they are taking care of their abusive parent, which of course is your decision to make. And I don't know what factors are playing into that. But I hope you know, Kirsten, that you don't have to take care of your abusive mother. even though she needs you in this way. I don't know what the moral thing to do is, but I want you to know that depending on the situation, it's possible that it is not immoral for you to say, I'm not going to take care of my mother. I know she needs someone to take care of her, but she abused me. I feel bad for her, but I'm going to draw a boundary. And it's hurtful to me. Now, for some people, your abusive parent who is ill or has cognitive decline or something, then it can be healing, right? Because there can be healing aspects to it. So just know that you don't have to. Because I've had a lot of clients who will find that to be a very novel concept. They're just like, well, really? Because if you're abused, you don't think you deserve it. And also the abused adult child will be constantly seeking love and acceptance from that abusive parent, but probably won't ever get it. So they keep banging their head against the wall, hoping to find something that will never come. And I just hope you're taking care of yourself and that you're meeting your needs overall. I'm not saying we're supposed to abandon our parents, but I don't know. I just want to raise that. And if you were to not take care of your mom, it's possible that your support system and society would judge you harshly, which is not okay. Abby says, I wonder if part of why Angela does not want Michael to have social media is that she suspects that the outside world will tell Michael he's in an abusive relationship and needs to run. Yeah, Abby, that's very astute. I hadn't thought about that. Makes sense. Erica says, it's so funny to me how they always put subtitles on Michael, but not on Angie. I'm from the same area as Angie, and I can still understand Michael better than her. Yeah, sometimes it is a bit of a mystery as to who they use subtitles with and who they don't. I suspect it's just an editor that just makes that call, right? But sometimes I'm like, why are you doing subtitles for that person? They're perfectly easily understood, and why are you not using... Anyway. Potentially a racist aspect to that. I don't know. All right. An email from listener Jay went to the website, emailed me. I just wanted to let you know why foreign customers might not receive any payment by TLC. It is basically for the benefit of the foreign cast members. Taxation and payment can become very difficult when done overseas. Interesting. So, yeah. Okay. Well, complicated, right? Tiffany, number 9, German snout. Good old German snout says, I see myself as a child while watching Daniel. What people see as maturity can be masking a lot of inner anxiety trying to be the easiest child possible. Yeah. Good old Lorraine Weinstein says, Daniel bonded so well with Ronald and at one point in the video even called him dad. Ronald was the only dad he ever had. The breakup was a huge loss for him, and I don't think he's over it. Yeah, I doubt that Daniel is over all that happened with Ronald, including the loss. Reading on a Mountain says, I remember my mom confiding in me as a child about her dating life. It made me feel so important. She would tell me I was so wise. It creates so much anxiety to be involved in your parents' dating life. Yeah. Shay says, formerly parentified child here. I used to be the favorite of my teachers. Parentified child, and I used to be the favorite of my teachers. I was only friends with adults, not other kids. Now I have a lot of trouble with boundaries, identifying my own feelings, and expressing my needs. Yeah, so just kind of classic parentification trauma. I also have some gnarly anxiety and OCD, another kind of classic symptom. Basically, the reason why a parentified child would have anxiety and OCD is because they were not nurtured enough, they were not protected enough. So the child growing up is under this constant sense of danger, and because someone else is depending on them, right? And what we want is that the child is dependent on someone and someone is taking care of them, and they always generally know someone will help me. But when you're parentified, you know no one is there for you, which is a very scary situation, and chronically you will have neurology that is more prone to anxiety and OCD. I'm glad that I can watch shows like this and see how my upbringing looked from an outsider's perspective. I also have a wonderful therapist now who I'm working with. You feel like you're letting your parent down by waking up to how wrong it was to be forced to grow up so quickly, but it's necessary for growth. Yeah, you actually bring up a really great point, Shay, that I've seen with a lot of people as I'm trying to help them become aware of and heal from and draw boundaries with others and maybe even their parents. That, you say you feel like you're letting your parent down. You even say by just even waking up to it. So yeah, this is the first step is, I'll be working with a client. I'll be suggesting some ideas. We'll be exploring things, and then this idea will emerge in the therapy room of just like, maybe my parent abused me by parentifying me. Is that really what happened? There'll be this immediate defense that will kick in that will shame the client. Be like, I'm such a terrible kid. I'm such a terrible kid for thinking it, because that's the way they were treated, right? But that's been an internalized voice, and it will prevent the individual from actually moving past that and fully accepting the abuse that they went through, such that they can get the care and corrective experiences and awareness around that. So, you point that out. So you say, you feel like you're letting your parent down by waking up to how wrong it was, but it's necessary for growth. Christina says, OMG, yes, I've been waiting for you to talk about Daniel. I find it so interesting how people admire mature children. I really want to hear more about your perspective on what children are sacrificing when single parents dump their lives on children, and how young single parents become dependent on our kids for closeness. How do single parents go about managing their desire to have mature children we can depend on coming from a single mom? Yeah, so Christina, I don't know exactly the angle you're coming at. So you are maybe having this issue. You're a single mom, single young mom, and you're saying, I really want to hear more about your perspective on what children are sacrificing when single parents dump their lives on children, and how young single parents become dependent on our kids for closeness. So you're sort of identifying that maybe you have an impulse for that. So the key is to cultivate secure attachments with peers. So being a single parent can develop a lifestyle in which you're cut off from peers, family members, friends, companions, even your own parents, this kind of thing, because of lifestyle, because of trauma, because of you're working too much. There's just a lot of interference with that. And so the impulse as a parent when you're in a situation like that is to look for companionship somewhere, and you have a child that's willing, and so you start to develop that with the child, and the child feels rewarded by that, and they feel special because of that. They feel like, oh, I'm more mature, I'm being told I'm better than other kids. But deep down they're sacrificing something, and they're deeply resentful and terrified of the world. But they're suppressing that because they don't want to bother you, because they don't want to push you away, because they know that you need them anyway. So the key is to have secure attachment with other people at your level or higher. The other part is self-awareness. So to know your needs. So you're at home, single mom, young kid, mature kid, old soul kid, in quotes, because maybe there's a bit of parentification that's already existed, or the kid's just kind of an old soul, whatever. Point is that you have a need that's in that moment of companionship. So and to notice that need, right? You had a bad day at work, or you went on a date, or you saw a TV show that involved adult themes or something, and you want to share it with someone. It's natural, and your kid is right there. All right, so you want to, because if you're not aware of your needs, then you'll just sort of act on it, right? And over time, you will cultivate a pressure on the child to suppress their opposition to that and to rise to your level so that they can meet your needs. And they'll even convince themselves that it's a good thing. So noticing your needs. What do I want right now? I want support. So if you notice that need and you're like, okay, what is that? What I'm looking for someone to validate me. Okay. It's perfectly okay to want your kid to validate you, but generally speaking, that's going to result in parentification of the child. So if you notice, I have a need for validation, I have a need for support, I have a need for someone to say that I'm okay as a person, or that it's okay to like this person, it's okay to break up. Obviously that is for someone of your age or older, an adult, not your kid. So noticing your needs, noticing the impulse to overshare, also to not assume that just because your child seems okay with it and seems mature or old soul, do not assume that means, and even if they're asking you things, right? Even if they're like, tell me, they seem anxious that you're not telling them, don't assume that is an indication of health or that you're supposed to engage in that. And the last thing is to be attuned to the child. If you're truly attuned and really taking the time, really noticing that, I said this during the Tiffany thing, that when Daniel was like sort of getting upset at her about the Ronald thing and the dating thing, and I comment on this, what I wanted Tiffany to do was to notice his pain and his anger and his hurt, and to attune to that, instead of trying to justify. Because for some parents, because of the way they were raised, they always feel like they're trying to defend themselves because of the way they're treated. And so sometimes your kids will judge you. It just happens. And so you'll feel like, oh, I have to justify myself to my kids. It's like, no. To engage in defensiveness to your child, especially if it's about dating, you are now involving them in a world that they cannot handle. And it puts them in this position over you. It's just an element that they are now the one that approves of you. So if your kid, for example, let's say you go on a date, you come home and your kid's like, wow, that guy was a big jerk face, and what's wrong with you that you like him? And if you have an impulse just to be like, no, you don't understand. Like at dinner, he was like, okay, attunement to the child. What's going on? What's the emotion? The emotion is the child in all likelihood is afraid of that guy, or afraid that you're going to pull away from your child toward that guy, or something about meeting that guy or you dating someone is scary or hurtful. And so if you say, oh, so even though in your head you're like, maybe he is, or maybe he isn't, or, you're attuned to the child's emotion and you address the emotion. Okay. And you would say something like, so you don't like him. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, I think he's a jerk face. Oh, okay. So you don't want me to date him. Is that? Yeah, I don't want you to date him. Okay. Well, when I date him, what are you worried about? Well, I'm worried that and then you address that, right? So that's, but it's hard because enmeshment is hard to change. Obviously, therapy would help. Tiffany, number 10. Hannah says, I have that mom like Tiffany. I was Daniel, and I was told I have an old soul, and I still feel like I'm taking care of my mother. I hold so much resentment toward her. It took her until I was 21 to say sorry. If you're going to have kids, don't be selfish. Daniel's a great kid. I feel awful for him. Yeah. Fala says, thank you so much. I was parentified, and your empathetic words really validated my experience. Because I wasn't overtly abused, I sometimes feel like I don't have the right to be upset about my childhood. Yeah, there's a lot of that from people, that they will feel upset about their childhood and feel like, well, I don't have the right to do so. In all likelihood, if that's what's happening, it's not rational for you to feel like you don't have the right to be upset. It's case-by-case basis, but usually when I hear someone say like, well, I don't know if I have the right to be upset about my parents, usually it's an indication of an internalized voice of shame. Nico says, I was parentified as a young child in my teenage years. I had that overwhelming feeling that I needed to help or save her growing up. I appreciate Dr. Honda's commentary about parentification. Dr. Honda's commentary about therapy made me look for a therapist. Ah, well, that's great. Samira says, Dr. Honda, you didn't tell us anything about the outfit you are wearing during the comments video, my last one. And because I'm an oddball, I spent the whole video distracted by your outfit. Like, is this a traditional Japanese home outfit? Is this a GI? Is this for Halloween? Did he just come home from training? So confused, but it looked great though. Samira, what outfit were you talking about? I wasn't wearing anything strange. Just joking. Amy Jax says, can we please do more guided self-checks? That was lovely. Yeah, so I think I did a spontaneous guided self-check last time. And to everyone out there needing a consensual, proactive internet hug, I send you love and support. Yeah, so I think I forgot that. I was like, okay, consensual internet hug. Okay, so maybe I'll do this every time. I don't know. But let's do a guided self-reflection at the end. It's the holidays are coming up, right? So I want you to think about what you want to do. Now, I really want you to think about it, particularly if you feel like you need to do this. Maybe pause the video. Deep breaths. What do I want? What do I want to do? Do I want to do that? Do I want a crowd? Do I want to be alone? Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do that thing with my family? Do I not want to do that thing with my friend? Do I want more time with my family? Do I want more time with my friends? Do I want to spend a bunch of money? Do I want to do this? Do I want to bust my ass cleaning the house and making a bunch of food for a bunch of ingrates? Or do I not? What do you want to do? And this could be a really complicated question. You really have to think about it, but really take the time. Really go inward. Because it's possible that a lot of us have never really thought about it. We just sort of go with the flow. you're working and taking care of the kids, and then all of a sudden holidays come up and you're sort of reacting, right? So think about, what do you want? Now, we don't always get what we want, right? But at least you know what you want, and you can use that as a guidepost upon which you can guide your behavior. But for a lot of us, we don't do that. It really is a tragedy to me when I hear about people will go through the holidays or through other big events like a wedding or something, and they will say, that was for them, that wasn't for me. At no point was I wanting to do any of that stuff. I just don't want to make people, I'm just trying to not upset people. And that really is a disservice to you. Now, again, it kind of depends, because there are things like if your partner always wants to see their family and you don't like them, it's like, well, you can't force your partner not to see their family, that kind of thing. So, and it would potentially be really impolite for you not to show up. Having said that, there's flexibility there, right? You don't have to go. The point is at least know what you want. So sometimes you really have to stop the madness, stop the frantically doing things all day. Just sit for 60 seconds and think about, what do you want with the holidays? What would be your if you could wave a magic wand, what would it be? I bet you for a lot of you, it would look very different. And you deserve that. You really, really do.